All right. Okay. Good evening, Facebook. This is Keisha Hamilton back for another meeting of Diverse Minds with you on Wednesday, June 30th. I have been away for about a month and I have missed you all so much. I had a lot of traveling I was doing in June, and so I just could not find the time to come on, but I'm so glad to be back with you tonight. So we're going to jump right in. We're talking about whiteness and knowing when you've got diversity, equity, and inclusion right. I've been having some conversations about this. Some of you, I may have caught my live last week where I had a little bit of did a short little video on when you know you've got diversity, equity, and inclusion right. But I'm going to talk about whiteness tonight and knowing when you've got diversity, equity, and inclusion right, because I've been having, like I said, some conversation around it, and different ones have been asking, you know, how do I know I have it right? And so if one or two people are asking about them, likely someone else wants to know about it as well. So we're going to answer some of those questions tonight. But you know, we always like to start off with our definitions, because it's important for us to have a framework that we're all, you know, are understanding together. So we're going to define diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, so that we all can be on the same page. So what is diversity? Some of you who have been with me for a while, you will know these definitions and these terms, but some new people are arriving at different times. And I find it, you know, as much as you hear about diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism today in the world, so many people really, you know, still want to know what it means, still just don't know. You know, so it's important for me to define it each time. So anybody who's clicking on my videos, that the first thing they're getting are some of the basics. And the basics are, what are these things? And then so they can begin to build from there. So what is diversity? Diversity is simply our difference. It's not just our skin tone. It's not just our hair texture. It's not just, you know, our family sizes. It relates to all those things, but it's also how we were raised and what kind of frames, what kind of lenses we see life through. You know what I mean? And the lens that we see life through generally is related to the culture that we grew up in, the philosophies, the ideologies, the thought processes, you know, that we grew up under. So, you know, our parents and how they thought about life, you know, what was important to them, what mattered to them, how they framed different situations, different people to us, what we saw them doing. You know, sometimes, a lot of times our diversity, you know, the way we think is related to just things that we see. People don't even have to say it. So a lot of it has to do with video and media and the news and TV and cartoons. All those things relate to, you know, the lens that we see life through. And they also are what give us our diversity of thought. They make us where we all kind of think differently. So not only are we looking differently in diversity, but we also think differently. Diversity is actual difference, not just in, again, your skin tone, but even more so in the way that you think. So what is inclusion? So we talk about DEI. Diversity is the D, equity is the E, and I is the inclusion. And we also talk about anti-racism. So E, we're going to talk about right now. What is equity? So equity is an acknowledgement and an awareness of barriers that exist, and an intention and an effort to eliminate those barriers so that everyone can have what they need to succeed or to live or to whatever. So, you know, any of you who have children, you know, if you have more than one child, you'll automatically know what equity looks like when you consider your children, if you're doing parenting right, because you know that your first child doesn't need necessarily what the second child needs. There's just no two children, as much as our children can look alike, you know, behave alike at times, think alike at times, they're not the same, and they don't always need the same thing. I've given the example before. I have 6 children actually, but my oldest child is a girl and my youngest child is a girl. My oldest child, she needs, you know, advice for living. She's 19 and you know, living as an adult now. And so she needs, you know, counsel on credit and, you know, car buying and, you know, house purchasing possibly, and just all those different things that, you know, adults do. Where my 7-year-old, that's my baby, you know, she doesn't need advice on buying a house or a car or building her credit. She needs just hugs at times. She needs to sleep with her mom at times. She needs, you know, popsicles from the store at times. I can't give my oldest child what my youngest child needs and or wants and think that I'm going to satisfy my oldest child. So I can't come to my oldest, my 19-year-old, and say, hey, look, I got you a box of popsicles. You know, I know you're going to be feeling great. Now, if it's a hot day and she's craving them, then she might be grateful. But if she's looking for advice on how to purchase a house or a car, a box of popsicles is not going to satisfy her. And on the opposite side, my 7-year-old, she's not going to want me to sit down with her after she's, you know, hurt her leg or fell or something, you know, or her desire is to sleep with me. And I tell her, you know, hey, Kaylin, my baby's name is Kaylin. Hey, Kaylin, you know, when you get to be, you know, 14, 15, whatever, we're going to start building your credit. You know, she has no clue what that means. She doesn't even care as well. So equity is giving a person what they need to succeed. It looks different than you know, different people's look different. It's not fair. The other example that I've given a few times is that you have two people who need transportation. One person needs a bike, the other person needs a car. You're giving the first person who needs a bike $500 or let's say $1,000 toward his bike. The person who needs a car, you're giving them $10,000. There's a $9,000 difference there. And somebody looking on accurately would say that that's not fair. You have two people who need transportation. One got 1,000, one got 10,000. Well, equity is not fair. We don't all need fairness. We don't need you to be fair when we're talking about equity, when we're talking about people and what they need. If we're going to talk about fairness in that, the only fairness that we need is that you give me what I need. So be fair by saying, okay, you need this, I'm going to give you this. And you need this person, which is different than this person, I'm going to give you that. Equity is not fair. Okay, while you're doing your diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, your anti-racism efforts, and you're creating these things in your organization, if you are trying to reach equality, which is not equity, and which is equal, which is not equity, and which is not what we need right now. If you're trying to reach equality through equity, then you're doing it wrong. Okay, equity is not fair, and it's not designed to be fair because it's not fair. We don't all need the same thing in order to succeed. And that's really important when we're talking about equity and when you're building your initiatives as organizations, as children, talking to your parents, as, you know, people in relationship with one another. You know, you don't always need the same thing at the same time. You know what I mean? So, you know, sometimes, you know, I might need a foot rub, you know, my feet hurt. I don't need you to rub my back when my feet hurt. You know what I mean? Equity is just not fair. And I know that's a minor example right there, but I'm just letting you know that when a person says what they need to succeed or to be successful, you need to be giving them that. And it doesn't necessarily look like what the next person is going to need or what they needed the day before. When I had one child, I only needed a stroller that had one buggy spot. When I had two children, I needed a stroller that had the two spots in the stroller. Those of you who have had two children close together, you know, the limousine that you have to push with two children, one in the car seat in the front, the other front, the baby in the front of it, you know, the 2 or 3 year old in the front of it. Okay. But I didn't need a two-seater stroller when I had one child. I also didn't need a two-seater stroller when I had 3 children. Now, it would have been nice if I had you know, because I did have my children small. It would have been nice if I had a three-seater. You understand? So equity is not fair. And I spend a lot of time on equity because so many people get equity wrong. So many people think that equity is equality, and it's not. And in our systems, we have to understand there's no way we're going to get anywhere in changing what America has created if we're trying to reach equality. Now, at one point, equality was appropriate. And I do think at some point, equality as a goal will be appropriate. I'm gonna say this. I think equality is still the goal. But the only way to get to equality at this point is through equity. You cannot get to equality, a state of equality that's equal. Okay, you think of the equal sign and doing the little, you know, whatever. You cannot get to a state of equality until you give different individuals what they need to succeed. And the definition of equity, acknowledging barriers that exist, and then eliminating those barriers. So you have to acknowledge that there have been barriers that have been created that have kept different individuals and groups of individuals in a stagnated space. And the only way they're going to catch up to an equal space is you've got to give them what they need to succeed. You've got to give them exactly what they need. And that's going to look different than some groups. And it's going to look unfair because it will be. It's been unfair that they've been kept back. And now we just have to balance that out. Okay, equity is my thing, people, so I can spend some time on that. But I'm going to go on to inclusion. So what is inclusion? And I'm watching the clock because I really want to get to whiteness and how you know when you're doing DEI right, because those are some subjects that again keep coming up, and they're going to keep coming up. You know, we're 460 years in, right, people? Okay, so what is inclusion? That's the I in DEI. Inclusion is having an active seat at the table. So when you think of inclusion, think of a boardroom with a big oval table and a bunch of people sitting around this table creating, okay, whether it's policy or programming or just a brainstorming session, whatever it is, right? So when you think of inclusion, think of one of the best ways to describe it is to consider yourselves at a table. Well, who's at the table? For one, what are we creating? That's what we want to know. So let's say you're an organization and you're trying to decide what's the best way to determine, time off. What categories should we include in time off? Do we do sick leave only? Do we do PTO? Do we do maternity leave? Do we do paternity leave? Do we do what kind of ways do we structure our programming, our policies and our procedures? What do we do? Well, who's at the table? Let's say, for example, we're talking about women with children. That's an easy one for me because I'm a mom with 6 children. When we're sitting at the table, if everybody around the table, if no one around the table has children, then we've got a problem at that table. There's a lack of inclusion there. Okay. If everyone around the table, only has small children, there's a lack of inclusion around there. So inclusion is ensuring that everyone that is being impacted or affected by any policy, procedure, practice, et cetera, that we have or that we're creating, any program, any initiative that we're creating, that their voice is represented at the table. Generally, when you're thinking about that, when you're thinking about the creation of that, you're probably going to have more than just white men around the table. Probably. So some of you all have seen the famous photo going around a couple of years ago where there was a group of white legislators who were sitting around the table, and they were creating legislation on women issues. They were all voting on women issues. And the reason why the picture was so famous was because was a group of all white men creating legislation on women issues. A group of men, okay, all men creating legislation on women issues. Well, which man present was capable enough of really speaking for a woman? Who can speak for a woman except a woman? Who can speak better for a woman except a woman? And who can speak better for women issues except women who have those issues? Various women who are in different stages of their lives as women. Who can speak better to those issues except women who are at different stages of their lives? Same thing when it comes to anything, when it comes to inclusion. When you're creating anything, and this is why we need to recreate everything, but when you're creating anything, and again, this is why we need to recreate everything, those who are going to be impacted by whatever we're creating, they need to be at the table. Their voices need to not only, and then that's the next thing we have to go to. Not only do they need to be at the table, they need to have an active voice at the table. Not only does their voice need to be active, because these are some of the ways that we've been excluded from the conversation. First we weren't at the table, and then 2, once we got at the table, we sat there like a skeleton at the table, or like a teddy bear. You know how you have your, little girls, your 3 and 4-year-old little girls having tea parties, and they have all their bears at the table. That's the next way that Black and brown voices got at the table. They got there and they sat around the table like little teddy bears, inanimate, uncontributing. We didn't contribute because we weren't allowed to. Excuse me. So not only do you need to have us at the table, we need to have a voice. We need to be allowed to speak. And not only are we speaking, whatever we're saying, it needs to be incorporated into whatever, it needs to be weaved into whatever is being created. And the loudest voice, the most weighty voice, the one that everybody should be relying on more, should be those that are most impacted by it. Okay, so that's inclusion. I don't want to spend too much time on these because I do want to get to the other stuff, but in inclusion is definitely making sure that all voices that are going to be impacted by whatever is taking place, initiative, program, policy, et cetera, that all of those voices are at the table and that they are included in whatever is being created, prominently. So what's racism? We have to talk about racism. It's very important to me on Amiga of Diverse Minds with Keisha Hamilton that we talk about racism. One, we're trying to take the sting out of that word. We want people to know what it is, how they do or don't contribute to it knowingly or unknowingly, and then understand why they have a responsibility to change it or continue to fight against it, right? Okay, so what is racism? Racism is simply, and it can be simply, but some people think it can be difficult, but it is racism is simply a social construction. Okay, so somebody somewhere at some time decided that in order for my life and people who look like me, not Keisha, but I'm talking about these other people who were sitting in a room somewhere at some time, in order for me and my people to do better and fare better in life, I'm going to create another category. Okay, and so the category they decided to create was one of race. Prior to, way long before America, and colonizers came from England over here and did all the horrors that they did to settle this land. White people were, there was no race. There was no race. There was the human race, which that's still all we have. But the construction of the difference in what makes race look like it is today. So we have, what race are you in? You see your applications. Are you Black? Are you Latina? Are you, Asian? Are you, all these different categories that have been created now. Those were not at one point. And then at some point they became something. So at one point, white people who, and I say white people because in today's world, white people we consider fair skin, lighter color eyes, fine, thin hair, that's what we consider as white. So white people in, early parts of our history, when America was beginning 400 something years ago, white people were considered landowners and men. That's who were the white owners. Obviously they're wives, but white men and landowners, you had to be a landowner. Potato farmers, Irish people who came to America, after some time, they weren't considered white. They were indentured servants, and they could be indentured servants because they were not considered white. As Americans needed to shift and justify slavery and make a distinction between, who could be slaves and who couldn't be slaves, or who should, and then also to create slavery and make it into some chattel slavery. And so at one point there was a thing where Black people could work their way out of slavery. Then eventually white people said, we can't have them working their way out of slavery because we need our free labor. And so we created chattel slavery. And that's simply where slaves, would be slaves, and everybody who was born to them for the rest of their lives would, live and die as slave, born and die as slave. Okay, that's chattel slavery. Well, as Americans wanted to create those distinctions between, white people and Black people, between slavery, the ability to keep slavery and then not, they said, we got to make a distinction because we do have indentured servants who look exactly like us, fair skin, light eyes, fine hair, who are also slaves, indentured servants, who could work their way out. Indentured service means you can work your way out of slavery. 7 years, a lot of times, was the time frame. Well, they needed to make a distinction because, it's not so easy to know, if you're looking at yourself walking, if this person is a slave or not. So in making that distinction, they decided that these dark-skinned people, Blacks, we're going to make them our slaves. We'll make them the ones who can be slaves. And so we're going to create race. And then when we create race, we're going to make a narrative around race so that it'll justify why we're doing what we're doing. They can't think. They're dumb. They're like animals. They're not fully human, all that stuff. So that's how race was created. Racism, and so we have to talk about race because now we got to talk about racism. What is racism? So racism, that's the, again, it's the social construction. Somebody, like I said, somewhere created that. And it's the distinction, the difference that's been created to empower one group and disempower another group, created on or based off of your skin tone, okay? And not necessarily that, because, well, not only that, because even when at some point, Hispanics were considered white, and they're not now. So at some point, Hispanics were considered white. And again, race, this is how you know it's fake and it's unreal. and it's just based off of social construction based on power and, you know, the need to stay in control, it changes based off of what it needs. So if white people being considered, I'm sorry, Latinx people being considered white empowers whiteness more, and we're going to talk about whiteness in a little bit, then we'll allow them to be a part of them. If we can do without them, then we will push them away. And so you'll see in history where they have pulled them in and pushed them out. Okay. So the difference between, so a lot of people say, well, what is racism? You know, how is it different than prejudice? Because it's very similar. Basically, it's a prejudging of someone based on their skin tone, you know, based on their presentation. That's a prejudgment, prejudice. And racism operates in the same exact way until it doesn't. And the place where it doesn't is in the fact that it has, racism is a structure, okay? So it's been embedded into our laws, into legislation, into our policies, into our practices, into our culture. Racism, the idea that one group can be benefited and the other can't. So it shows up in so many different ways. One of the main ways that it shows up today, and which, you know, is one of the reasons why we have this explosion of DEI need. We've always had it, but now people are saying, okay, now we need to really focus on this because of George Floyd. One of the main ways that it shows up is in the narrative where a white person can call the police on a black person and black person ends up dead, always, okay? Or whiteness, because of racism. Good question, Tremaine. They are and they aren't at times, but we'll get back to that. But thank you. I'm glad to see you're here tonight too. But so again, with racism, one of, like I said, the biggest examples of how it is related to power. So anybody can be prejudiced, right? Anybody can look at somebody else and say, you know, I don't like you because, you know, your hair is blue. You know, somebody could do that. We actually have people who do have blue hair. It's obviously not a natural color, but people do have blue hair. People might have a prejudice against it, right? So anybody can do that. Well, as a racist person, or what racism itself can do, it says, I don't like your hair, and I have created a law that says you can't wear your hair like that. So now not only do I like your hair, do I not like your hair, I created a law that says I don't like your hair. So when you wear your hair in a way that I don't like, this law that has been created, now I can, you know, punish you for that. I can throw you in prison. I can, you know, kill you, and I can get away with it. That's the difference between racism and just simple prejudice. Racism has a power structure behind it that prejudice does not. I've said this numerous times, and I'm going to keep saying it because it's super important for us to understand that racism affects whole groups of people. Prejudice is just, me to this person, which again, I can be me to that person, which, again, I can be. Racism is a macro level. It's affecting whole groups of people. Okay. And you'll see that played out everywhere. You won't see just, me, individual person, being prejudiced to this person and then it affecting whole groups of people. You're not going to see that, but you will see racism affecting whole groups of people. And again, it's that power structure behind it. So the thing that I've said before that I'm going to keep saying is that Black and brown people, we don't have that power structure. We have been excluded from that power structure. That power structure was created against us and with us in mind to exclude us from it. Okay, so we don't operate through a power structure of racism. Now, can Black and brown people operate, as prejudiced people? Yes, they can. Can they, be a part of the problem when it comes to racism, like upholding that ideology, upholding, calling the police on another Black person and that Black person can Black and brown people uphold systems of racism? 100%. Okay, we can. But do we have the power structure behind us to affect whole groups of people? No, we do not. Okay, so it's very important for us to understand. So again, racism is just the unjust distinction between humans based on physical features, okay, coupled with systemic power to act on that unjust distinction. Like I said, Blacks and other people of color, we can't be racist. We just don't have that institutional or structured power base to enact on all others. We just don't have it. It was created against us. But we can act it in the prejudiced manners. We definitely can do that. What is anti-racism? We'll hit that one briefly because it's not too long. Anti-racism is simply actively and intentionally working to dismantle and oppose racism. So clearly you have to know what racism is so that you can actively oppose it. And then you have to do something. It's much more than just, gaining knowledge and then sitting in that knowledge and doing absolutely nothing with it. Anti-racism is an active, looking for, seeking it out, and then rooting it out, racism, in an effort to, like I said, oppose racism. Okay, we are at the mark where I like to go right into tonight's subject. So what is whiteness? So I've been talking a lot about whiteness on my page. The different pages that I have, a meeting of diverse minds with Keisha Hamilton. In my personal page, I have a lot of posts that are public. So feel free to, go through those if you ever want to. But so what is whiteness? It's not simply our skin tone, your skin tone, the skin tone. It's not simply the skin tone. Whiteness is not simply the skin tone. It is related to the skin tone, but it's a culture. Okay, it's a culture. It's a culture of being white. It's important to understand how it was created as far as what white is, because again, there is no distinct races. There's really just the human race. Now, because our society has been based off of and established off of the distinction between races, we do have to acknowledge that has occurred and correct those things in order to get back to a place where we can just consider all of ourselves as humans. We've got to go through that before we can get there. So because we have to go through that, what is white? What is white and whiteness? What is it? Like I said, it's not just simply the skin tone. It's the culture of being white. It's the white identity. And it's crazy because I was doing a little bit of research on it, because as much as I, speak on it, I'm like, okay, well, what is just a simple definition of white? Is there one? Is it not just the culture? And it's crazy because when you consider whiteness and white culture, sometimes we do wonder, what is white culture? And if you have any ideas and you feel like you want to put some in the comments, please do, to just kind of spread the conversation around. But when we talk about white culture, what is white culture? We know we can easily name Black culture and Latina, Latinx culture, which Mexicans fall under there. We can talk about Caribbean culture. We can talk about Asian culture. What is white culture? Because that's really what encompasses whiteness, okay? Which again, not only are the people who look white a part of that, but individuals of other races can also uphold whiteness, okay? So what is that they're upholding? What is it? So what is white identity? What do we think of it? So in my mind, I think of it as, it's land ownership. Okay, whiteness has a culture of we want land ownership. Whiteness is ever changing based on the need. Okay, so at one point, potato farmers, Irish, were not considered white. And then today they are considered white. Poor white people today, as much as they want to and do claim and are white, they don't necessarily fall into whiteness. They're not like invited to the party. They come, they're around, they'll be protected if Black or brown people come around. They'll be more accepted than Black or brown people. But poor white people are really not as accepted into whiteness as much as they might feel like they are. But so whiteness is it's power, it's prestige, it's status. That's what whiteness is. And when you think of white culture, tell me, what are you thinking of when you think of white culture? To explain what whiteness is. What is whiteness? It's an intention to do whatever is necessary to maintain power. That's whiteness. It's an intention to do whatever is necessary to maintain power. And again, not only do white people operate through the construct or through the identity of whiteness, other races can do that as well. So you'll see, the Black and brown individual who, is operating through whiteness, who's saying, I'll do whatever it takes to keep power. We have our Candace Owens and our Clarence Thomases who, we don't claim, they are dark-skinned people, but they operate through whiteness. They operate through this ideology and this intention to ensure that the power structure of whiteness is maintained. It's a system that normalizes exclusion at all costs. Whiteness is very exclusionary. We've got how many clubs, how many golf clubs and, I don't even know other club names because I'm not a part of any of them. But how many clubs do you know that Whiteness has? Whiteness has so many different clubs. It's very exclusionary. They have all these cliques, all these, unless you pay this amount, you can't be a part of it. Unless you pay this other amount, you can't be a part of it. And those of you who pay down here, you can only be down here. And then those of you who pay up here, it's a very exclusionary, yes, 100% Tremaine. Poor white people still uphold whiteness, even living in, because poor white people, they do want to, they rather be white than not white, because not white is Black or indigenous and people of color, and living in that space it's much more difficult than being white. Okay. But again, whiteness is very exclusionary in its practices. It's very clubbed. It's very, we've got our special group over here, and you all are not a part of it, right? It's the normalization of one body type versus another. Whiteness is like, we are normal and you are not. Our body types, this is normal. And some of you have seen that. I had a conference thing, the seminar, something I was doing today, a session on Zoom today. And one of the video pictures that was shared, it was on diversity, equity, inclusion, understanding cultures and stuff like that. That's what the conference session was on. One of those pictures that was shared was a Black woman. And many of you, if you've studied this a little bit, you may have seen a picture of a Black woman whose shape was of such that she was used in like a circus. Excuse me, they put her in like this circus area to, because she was just so unusual in her shape compared to whiteness, who says, this is normal, that is not. And this is so not normal that we're going to bring you into a circus arena and show you off because you're that not normal according to us, right? It's the commitment to chasing the never reached care. So whiteness is very, it's very persistent about chasing after stuff and amassing, and getting it and holding it all to themselves and keeping it. Okay, that's just how whiteness is. It's the legal and systemic and structural culture phenomenon that whiteness, that me is my ideology, that will always remain on top. Okay, so we created this legal structure, this systemic culture, that whiteness and our ideas, our values, the things that we feel like are most important, that they will always have a place and the place at the top. So, we can see all these other ideas and cultures and things like that down there, and we can pull from down there up to ours when we want to. You see white women wearing cornrows, or, white people, dancing to the music of Black people, but you'll see them, denying those Black people though. So we can pull from your culture, but at all costs, we're still going to be in this place up here at the top. What whiteness is, it just protects itself at all costs. Okay, that's whiteness. Because I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, I'm going to go on to how do you know when you're getting DEI, when it's been done right. Okay, we're going to get right back into whiteness as well, though. But how do you know when you're doing DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, white? How do you know? I got to look her up, Tremaine. I don't know Sarah Barton. That name is super familiar. I'm going to look her up. But how do you know when you're doing whiteness right? Because whiteness protects itself, and this relates right back to the topic of whiteness. Because whiteness protects itself at all costs, because as humans, we are hardwired for self-preservation. We are hardwired to preserve, to protect, to ensure that we can survive another day. That's just a part of our human nature. None of us, decided that. We just were created in that manner, or born in that way, or whatever your idea of how we came to be. It was a part of us when we came to be. Okay, that's self-preservation, the desire to live. You'll see people, in some of the worst conditions, and they are fighting for their lives with everything that's within them. And some of us looking on are like, I think you would be justified in deciding that you don't want to live in that condition, whatever that condition might be for that person, for somebody looking on. But even in those conditions, we as humans are just hardwired to want to self-preserve. Well, whiteness, So there are two sides of that self-preservation, right? One way that you can look at it, when you consider Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color, and how they have persevered, that lets you also see a desire to a tenacity, that I'm going to survive no matter what. And that's why Black and brown and individuals are still here today, because we have this tenacity, that human feature that's just in us. It says we're going to survive no matter what. And so we've survived no matter what. Same thing with whiteness and white people. It's as human as Black and brown individuals. I probably should have said that the other way, because the other way is when it's not considered that, but it's as human, and its desire to self-preserve is the same. Well, the difference between the two is that for the past 460 plus years, whiteness has existed in a certain way. So whiteness, it believes that only the strong survive. Whiteness believes that, we can't coexist together successfully. Whiteness believes that in order for me as whiteness to survive, I've got to make sure that nobody else gets near me, in their survival. I've got to destroy all others. And so we have the narrative of only the strong survive. We have competitions. We have this thing where, I've got to be better than you. And then when I get better than you, then I got to amass all this status, power, honor, etc. I got to just have more than you. Okay. That's whiteness, because it believes for some reason that we can't survive together successfully. Whiteness believes that I've got to survive and you can't. And so, and there are so many examples of this everywhere you look. On your job, who are all your supervisors? Who are all your CEOs? Who are all your board members? Who are, who's corporate? Who's sitting there? Who's at the table creating everything that you have to live up under, that you have to work through? And how long has it been like that? From the inception of your organization, likely. How long has it been like that? From the inception of, when white Americans or white colonizers came over here to America, did they begin to do the exact same thing, that I have to survive and nobody else can survive with me? Yes, that's how long whiteness has been self-preserving in that manner. Whiteness says that I have to amass all the wealth, the land, the income, the status, the weapons, the power, so that I can control, because I have to survive, because I can't survive, because I don't want to survive or can't survive with others. I'm not exactly sure what that one is, whether it's I can't or don't want to survive with others, but whatever it is, whiteness does not believe that it can survive with others. And so it's done everything in its power to self-preserve, everything in its power to, ensure that it stays on top. And there are no limits to what it will do in order to stay on top. Which is why, when you're doing your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, white people should understand that they are not the ones who can decide when it's done, when it's right, when it's correct. So just to be clear, we've got about another 200 years before we're probably going to be able to see a true, coming, a true balancing, a true equality, Because I do believe that getting back to equality is where we need to go. We just have to go through equity to get there. But we have a long time, because we have more than 460 years of this extreme imbalance. We got more than 460 years. And in order to bring that back, a lot of generations have to die off. A lot of generations have to be born. A lot of people have to be taken out of office. They have to retire from office, or be voted out of office, or whatever. They have to retire from their jobs as CEOs and, vice presidents, etc. All these ideologies that are preserving whiteness in our organizations, they have to shift. They have to be turnover. So until that occurs, en masse, we've got a while before we're going to see that. But we do have to start somewhere, which is what we're doing now. We do have to start somewhere, and we have to understand, whiteness has to understand that it cannot be tasked with deciding when it's reached the goal, when it's accomplished it. Because of that self-preservation of whiteness, because of that because our human nature that we didn't decide on, it just came with the package. that self-preservation. And then for whiteness, the idea that it can't survive with anyone else, relying on them who have been preserving themselves for more than 460 years, have been preserving that power, that status, relying on them, even after 5 or 10 years of them studying and being in communion and conversation with Black and brown individuals, relying on them to determine when we've reached a goal that says that, yeah, we're doing DEI right, is a huge mistake, because whiteness is still always preserving itself. It always is going to default back to itself. Now, will it default back to itself, and can it be checked and then fix itself 100%? Okay, it has to be. That's the process that we have to go through. I can't say, how many people through George Floyd, how many Black and brown individuals at the, and this is just George Floyd, okay? We're not talking about during Martin Luther King's time. We're not talking about during Malcolm X's time. We're not talking about Marcus Garvey. We're not talking about any of these times during history, the Black Panther time. None of these other times we're talking about, but let's just talk about George Floyd time. All the relationships that Black and brown individuals have had with white and whiteness, how many of them have been broken because whiteness seeks to preserve itself? So my own personal story, I have a friend who I had for 20 years and thought that this was really my friend. and I was a friend to this person. But through George Floyd and through them, choosing not to understand, choosing to embrace whiteness over friendship, which whiteness does so very often, it's just incredibly common, then that relationship had to break. But this is a 20+ year relationship that we're talking about. And my story, I could say is my story, and I could be lying to you, because I'm not lying to you, but the commonness, the regularity, the normalcy of how many Black and brown individuals have had white people who they thought, and whiteness who they thought were their friends for 20, 30 years. George Floyd happens, 10, 15 years of friendship, and a total break in the relationship. And not just a simple break, like, I just don't understand, let's just kind of part ways, no, like a violent break, these, with tears and anger and madness, because whiteness couldn't stay in control, because whiteness didn't get to advance. It didn't get to, be in a position of power, because again, whiteness is always all about preserving their power. It's very intentional in that way. Sorry, I'm feel like I'm choking, so I'm getting some water coming to me. But so again, we cannot rely on whiteness to decide when we're doing DEI right, because it's always going to revert back to itself. Even some of another story, and some of you all may have your own stories, and please feel free to share them. But even some of our allies that we have, thank you so much. Some of our allies that we have, who have supposedly been allies for a while, they feel like they check a few boxes, and not in an offensive way, but just, I've passed this test, that test, this test, this, I have this experience with you and that experience with you, and da, 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 da. And so I'm really connected to this community. And then whiteness does what it does. Whiteness operates in a way where it operates through these blinders, where it can't see a lot of times, regardless to the shared experiences, regardless to, the conversations and the longevity of the relationship, regardless to how often they're around these people. Because whiteness operates a lot of times with these blinders on, it'll do things. Yes, Tremaine, you are 100% correct. It will still kill and it will destroy. And so whiteness, I just have an example, another one where whiteness, as an ally, I'm, really supposedly feeling like and wanting to be considered and supposedly acting like an ally. Then they do something that totally puts them outside of allyship, because the action and the behavior, it acts, because a lot of times you can ask the question when you're talking about, how do you know when you gotten it right? Who benefits? Who's benefiting? Now, you got to know history to know who's benefiting a lot of times. Sometimes you can just look at it and tell, but who's benefiting? You got Black organization, white organization, both of them are, seeking funding, and white organization who's already fully funded decides that I want a piece of the pie, and so I'm going to, get this funding over there. Well, who just benefited there? Black organization or white organization? White organization. Did white organization need it? No, they didn't need it. Did black organization need it? Yeah, they really, really needed it. But yet, who benefited? But when you got that money that you knew that they needed, and you took it for yourself, white organization benefited. That's just an example of who benefits, right? So when you're asking yourself that question as an ally and you're making these decisions, who benefits? A lot of times, allies they don't want to, when they've been kind of caught, and not like it was an intentional thing, because again, those blinders are there, and they don't often, I don't think that they're consciously thinking about how they can do harm to others. They're not doing that. But when their actions, black and brown individuals says, hey, look, that action was exactly this, and it did this harm, and it's doing all this harm. A lot of times, whiteness in its need and its commitment to self-preservation, even as allies, it will deny what it's done. It'll break the relationship. It'll decide that, we're not going to be friends anymore. Because I know what I did and it wasn't wrong. Mind you, every sign, every action is like they took it out of Whiteness's book, because they did. This historical novel that we've been creating for the past 460 plus years, it took their actions, their behavior, their wording, their tears, their shock and awe that they would be considered as doing something foul like that, their confusion, because they really are confused. All those things it would take from it, despite the 10, 15 years they say, I've been in this working as an ally. They do something like that clearly is harm, and they can't see it and refuse to see it. Why? Because they're still self-preserving. And because at some point, because the shift in this, I keep telling people, because it's so important, we're not going to get to an equal state. We're not getting equal without white people losing power. You've got to come to a place of shared power. You got to come to a place of shared economics. It's got to happen. That's got to happen. That requirement to share, it kills. It kills relationship. It kills allyship. It blinds. It confuses. It produces tears. It breaks relationships. Because whiteness, that the need to share, they don't want to do that. Now, for 460 plus years, they have not had to do that. They haven't had to do that. And when we've had these small efforts, of trying to get us to a place of equality, it always gets derailed by white people. That self-preservation, it always gets derailed, because black people are not derailing. And don't get me wrong, we got our Clarence, Thomases, and our Candace Owens. We got our black folks out there who act like, who act through whiteness, who uphold whiteness. We do have them. Okay. They're sprinkled here and there enough, but not enough where they are actually, they're not really, they cause us harm, make no mistake, they do. But they're not keeping us from, gaining that equality. They're not keeping us from that. It's white people who are keeping us from that. Again, that self-preservation is so very strong that you cannot rely on yourself as a white person, as a white ally, to work within this system to create change without your check there. I asked the question in the beginning of this conversation about the table. When we're talking about a table, of people who are creating and making policies, practices, procedures, that creation is going on. The example that I gave in the beginning of this conversation was that, we had a picture that was circulating about 3 or 4 years ago where there was a huge oval table, and all around the table were all white men. And they were creating policy and practices on women issues. And so I said already, a little bit earlier, that there's something wrong with that. And that who better to decide on, to create, to establish, to do anything when it comes to women issues except women? Who better? who, and then various women who can speak on various women's issues. Who better? Definitely not men. Okay, but that was what was around the table, was a bunch of men were sitting around the table. Well, who better than to speak on, teach on, and create what needs to be changed and how that change occurs, except Black and brown individuals who are living with these conditions. Now, I'm the firm believer that we cannot do this alone. We don't need Black and brown people only doing the, creating the change. We do need to do this together because we have to have a balance. A lot of people, different people have said, thank God that Black people simply want equality. And because we do, we don't want to be like white people. We don't want to gain our liberation through the same methods that white people have gained their power. We don't want that. We don't want to become like white people. And thank God for that. That's not what we want. We actually want a system, a space where we can work together as white and whiteness and Black and brown people of color together. We want that, where we can work together. And I truly believe that that's the only way that we're going to create together something that'll be beautiful eventually one day. But we cannot have white people who do the ownness is on them. They've created these horrible systems. They maintain these horrible systems. They have the responsibility and the accountability to decreate them, that's not even a word, is it? Deconstruct them, to burn them up, and then say, let's sit at the table together, everybody, and let's all make something new, right? So white people cannot decide, on this. You don't ever get to decide if it's right. I had another conversation with someone, and it's on my page, you'll see it, where, individual said, I'll never, be approved, be approved of Black people. I've worked in these spaces for so long and they don't approve of me. Well, that's not the case. Okay. Let me be very clear. It's what is never approved is whiteness and white people in that sense, in the whiteness sense. So not just you as a white person, that's not the disapproval. The disapproval comes when you are, as a white person, as an ally, and you're, working in these spaces, and someone has to say, hey, look, what you're doing right now is right. That thought process that you have right now, it's leading to more whiteness. When you, white person, who decides that you, Black person, who's checked my thoughts and kind of helped me to, or who's trying to help me to see that I'm upholding whiteness and I refuse to accept that, then that white person generally, who's been in that space will say, well, you just don't accept me. Well, no, it's not that. I don't accept whiteness. I don't accept you upholding it. And I'm not, and if you're going to work in this space with me, then you've got to change that. But most of the time, whiteness in that space will say, no, you just don't accept me, because whiteness just wants to. And what's so interesting about this is that it's so historical and so very common that many of you probably, can bring up, example after example after example after example of that occurring in your, personal life, professional life, your family life, is so incredibly common. So whiteness, like I said, it seeks to preserve itself. Whiteness is its own culture of preservation of, only the strong survive, of self-preservation, of I'm going to keep and maintain power at all costs. That's whiteness. And when you, as an ally, when do you get to this? When do you know that you are doing it right? When you're doing DEI right? It's when the Black and brown people around you, when you can answer the question yourself, and they can too, that these policies, these practices, these thought processes, these decisions that I'm making, they're not upholding whiteness. They are upholding the whole. Okay. It is almost been an hour, and I like to be done at an hour. So I am about to get off here. I appreciate you all for joining me again on tonight. It has been a while since we have been together, a month or so, and I have missed you all. I don't have a class right now, so I'm going to be sleeping. Well, actually, I'm in a class for the next 2 days. I got another class I'm in, but I'll be done with it on Friday. But I'm going to be sleeping very good this weekend. But again, I appreciate you for joining me. I will see you all next Wednesday. Please invite your family members and your friends, etc., to join our conversations. We need more people to understand what this is so that we can have more allies, and so we can develop accomplices who are willing to really get their hands dirty in the work. Because the dirtiness of the work is just, being intentional and specific about what actually has to happen and not hiding behind niceties. Not that you have to be rude, but it's having conversations like we're having today. And many people think these are not nice conversations. So let's find more people who are willing to, engage on this topic. Bring them. Let's, tell them to come and join the conversation at times. And again, I will see you all next week. I really appreciate being able to engage with you all on a weekly basis. These are, very therapeutic conversations for me. So thank you for joining, and I will see you all next week, Wednesday. Bye-bye.